Mosul was one of the smaller countries in the northern part of the continent. While not particularly small in general terms of area, compared to countries like Aleb, it could hardly be considered a large kingdom. Nevertheless, Mosul had thus far managed to hold its own against its neighbors by making use of its natural borders and carefully managing its resources and military. However, while this careful management was the reason why Mosul had been able to hold its borders in the past, it was also a constant source of many headaches for the upper echelons of the ruling class. Among these resources, the 5 dungeons that lay within its borders were some of the most precious available to them. These 5 dungeons provided the country with additional resources that had more than once been key to its survival: iron and copper ores, leather pelts, wood, and even apples. Though it didn't sound like much, the 5 dungeons produced resources that were particularly useful in times of war: wood for arrows and bows, leather for armors, iron and copper for weapons and helms, and apples were useful as rations. The Phantom Dungeon was particularly useful, as it produced iron and copper, and it had been instrumental in preparing the army more than once in the past. Their importance to the survival of the country could not be overstated. The kingdom had made an effort to protect each and every one of its dungeons, building a city near every single one of them, with a standing army to guard it. Naturally, the soldiers would also train within the dungeons, which helped the soldiers keep their skills sharp and become accustomed to the sight of blood. The military had a strict rule of having all members of the standing armies go into the dungeon a set number of times per year, including the military reserves. The kingdom truly endeavored to make use of the dungeons, so as to not squander its benefits thoughtlessly. But it was exactly this reliance on the dungeons that made them a source of greed, even within the kingdom itself. To rule over a domain that had a dungeon meant to have more influence in the kingdom as a whole. It granted the person presiding over that territory not only the ability to manage a significant number of resources, but it also allowed that person to make connections with all kinds of influential people, and provided a significant rise in status and fame. Because of this, the only natural response to the announcement of the king was a mad scramble from most nobles. Almost every family with a claim to nobility that had the time and money to join the fray was scrambling to get their chance to conquer the dungeon. Naturally, not every single person who wished to participate could, and not everyone that could had the desire to participate. But the announcement still caused enough chaos in the social circles of the nobility that the king considered personally smacking some of the individuals to calm their foolishness. It was only thanks to his wife's sage counsel that he refrained from doing so. The queen, while she had a good heart, was not shy about calling out her husband and spelling out the negative consequences of what could happen if he did as he desired. What would the world think if he went around bonking the nobility of his kingdom in the back of their heads like it was some sort of game? She had to remind him that his strength was no laughing matter, and even a half-hearted smack might be enough to kill some of the individuals. Had these individuals known of her intervention, they probably would have sent her gifts and letters of thanks and appreciation, because no one wanted to be struck by the king. Not when he could brandish heavy war hammers with a single hand as if they were toys. The scramble of the nobles had some interesting effects on the Adventurers Guild, as the demand for B-rank adventurers skyrocketed. Messengers and other vassals were sent from many nobles, scattering over the country in search of information about the best teams. Requests were sent out. Information was exchanged. Deals were made behind closed doors. In a sense, it was a controlled war between the nobles. Had it not been because the king specified that only adventurers that originated from the country of Mosul could take, some of the noble families would have certainly gone out to recruit adventurers from other countries. This rule was made by design, naturally, with the sole intent to try to slow the spread of the news to neighboring countries, and to limit their involvement. A similar rule was made to ban the involvement of any soldiers and members of the private armies of the nobles, as this was meant to limit loopholes in which a noble could defer command to a more experienced commander entirely.